What's up, everyone in War Eagle? This is Ceasar Walker, one-fourth of the War Rapport crew, where we provide you content, Auburn football content, as well as college athletics. And this week, guys, actually, before we get into what I like to feature as our power football rankings for the SEC conference, we want to encourage you guys to go out and follow us on our social media platforms, the War Report, on IG as well as Twitter. And don't forget, if you're listening to us and watching us on YouTube, go out and subscribe. We like to keep feeding you guys with content from a fan's perspective as we talk about the sport we love, college football, as well as other sports related to Auburn University. Now, guys, let's get into our power rankings. We had a wild week of college football this past weekend, and yes, the rankings have changed from the previous week. Coming in at number 14, which hasn't changed, is Arkansas. Guys, Arkansas does not have a coach. They've already given up on this season. They're looking forward to next season with a new era and a new head football coach. No need to spend much time on them. Let's move on to number 13 is Vanderbilt. They took quite a beating this past weekend, guys. And so they're ahead of Arkansas. They do have a conference win, and they still have their coach. So they're at number 13. That brings us to number 12, and that is South Carolina. This has been a disappointing year from them, a season of highs and lows. Beating Georgia was pretty much the high point for this team, and there hasn't been much to celebrate since then. Will Muschamp has been struggling. I'm not sure if he can survive, and they have what I think is another beating waiting on them next week when Clemson rolls into town, and it looks like they'll be staring at a 4-8 season. So at number 12 is South Carolina, which brings us to Ole Miss at number 11, who was ranked higher in the previous week, but they took a pretty good beating. They scored some points on LSU this past weekend, but the losses keep piling up, and now they're staring at 4-7, are no longer bowl eligible, and now they'll basically be playing spoiler to the following team, which is number 10, Mississippi State. Mississippi State rounds out pretty much the bottom 4 or 5 of teams in the power rankings. These are teams that are struggling. Mississippi State, of all these teams, have an opportunity to be bowl eligible, actually. But they have to run the table because they're kind of behind the 8 ball a bit. They lost, I believe, this past weekend. And so, guys, they have to run the table and actually beat Ole Miss, who will probably be motivated to spoil their season. If they win out, they can be bowl eligible at the end of the year, which brings me to number 9, Kentucky, which is sitting at 5-5 and have a cupcake this upcoming weekend. So they will be bowl eligible, but they'll also have an opportunity in a big game the following week when they play their rival Louisville. Winning that game will be big. Louisville is currently 6-4. So winning that game, despite kind of the season they've had a very quiet season, but they win that and run the table, they'll be 7-5, which is quite an accomplishment considering what they lost from the previous year. So coming at number 9 is Kentucky Wildcats, which brings me to number 8, Tennessee. Not much has changed with Tennessee. They did not play this past weekend. They were off, but they will play Missouri. This is pretty much, and we can move on to number 7, Missouri. This is pretty much the battle for the 7th seed here in the power rankings. I don't foresee either team moving up from that point, and this is pretty much to see who gets bowl eligible first. This is going to be a pretty interesting game because I want to see if Missouri can bounce back against the tough loss against Florida, and I want to see if Tennessee actually is improving like I think they're improving. So these teams are both 5-5. The winner becomes bowl eligible, and as I project, they will move up or remain in number 7 in the power rankings. So that brings me to number 6, and that's Texas A&M. Texas A&M had a strong showing against South Carolina this past week. This is a pretty good middle of the road team. They're still Jimbo Fisher is still building that program. They're not quite elite yet. But they're improving, and so they're going to have a tough go at it in the following weeks. They do still have to play LSU, so I do foresee another loss coming, and they're right behind my program, the Auburn Tigers, at number 5, who had a tough weekend with Georgia. Made an interesting game of it late, but couldn't get it done. We talked more about that in our post game. You want to check that out if you get a chance. This is pretty much where I see Auburn they're going to be, unless they play spoiler and upset one of the teams ahead of us, which is Bama, which we will talk about later. They're pretty much going to be entrenched at the 5 spot. Pretty much all the 4 teams I personally think are better than Auburn. They may have something to say about it in the Iron Bowl with Bama, but they're currently sitting at number 5. Now, as usual, guys, I own the fact that I'm hating and that I'm hating on the teams ranked ahead of us. So you're going to see some interesting names for the teams I got here. Sitting at number 4 is the Florida Swamp Lizards. You call them Gators, but I'm hating today. They're the Swamp Lizards. So, guys, they're sitting at number 4. They had an impressive showing on the road against Missouri, and they are looking to probably going to be in a New Year's Six Bowl with 2 losses, another 10-win season a possible 10-win season for Dan Mullen. Of course, he has to beat Florida State, which I don't see him struggling with that. But they've had a pretty good season. They needed some help from us to beat Georgia, so they have a shot at representing the East in the SEC Championship. That didn't quite go as planned, but another 10-win season for Dan Mullen. He's building that program up well, and they're sitting comfortably at the 4th spot, which brings me to number 3, and that brings us to what I call the Updikes, which we affectionately at Auburn call them, but they're known to the rest of the world as the Alabama Crimson Tide. Very rarely do you win convincingly and slide down the power rankings. Well, of course, guys, the story of the weekend was the fact that Tua was lost for the season with a hip injury. We hope he makes a swift, quick recovery. He actually had surgery today in Houston, Texas today. I'm not sure of the success of it, but they expect for him to make a full recovery. But needless to say, he is done for the year. And that does affect Bama's chances in terms of challenging to move up the rankings, per se. They're basically sitting at number 5. We think they may remain at number 5 when the college football playoff rankings come out in another day or so, or probably when you see this today. But guys, they're sitting there and they've slid down. I currently don't think they're the second best team. They're probably the 3rd best team at this point. We'll wait to see what Mac Jones can do and how he looks on the road in a hostile environment at Jordan-Hare. But sitting at number 3 is the Alabama Crimson Tide. That brings me to number 2. Everyone knows them as the Georgia Bulldogs, but we like to call them the Leg Humpers. Impressive win by Georgia. I got to give it to them. They did what they needed to do. They came in and took care of business against the Auburn Tigers and won big. Not big, but a big win. These guys, this is set up for a prime matchup with number 1, and that's the LSU Tigers, as I call them, the Fighting Orgerons. They're number 1 in the nation, guys, and they look pretty unstoppable. It looks like they're going to roll into the SEC Championship, barring some massive upset. They're going to roll into the SEC Championship undefeated and facing the Georgia Bulldogs. And as we kind of hinted in previous recordings, guys, we think this is going to be an intriguing matchup. I expect it to be. I don't think Georgia's going to lay down. I think they're built to give LSU problems. They have a very good defense, and they have at the very least, a competent offense. They're led by Jake Fromm. They got a good running game. The offensive line I was impressed with their offensive line in our matchup. So I think with LSU, we know who they are. I mean, they're led by who I think the guys are going to be soon to win the Heisman. Their quarterback is amazing. He's had a great year. So I think LSU they've proven themselves. They've had big wins after big wins this season, beating us, beating Texas, beating Bama. They have an incredible resume. So I think they're sitting at number 1. I have them at my number 1, and that rounds out our power rankings, guys. So that's all I got for today. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, IG, as well as subscribe to us on YouTube. These rankings are subject to change on a weekly basis, and so I'll be here each week giving you my Power 14 rankings. Hopefully, they're objective, but if you disagree, leave a comment. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if I'm wrong, off base, being biased, or what. let me know. We want to hear from you guys. So subscribe to us, follow us, leave comments, give us your feedback. We love to hear from you. This is Ceasar Walker of the War Rapport. Have a good one, guys.